My name is Elias Thorne, a 32-year-old landscape architect who had just moved into an antique Victorian house in a quiet suburb of Vermont, USA. I was seeking peace and a creative space, far from the hustle and bustle of the big city. The house, built in the late 19th century, possessed a classic beauty with intricate architectural details, but it also held a hint of gloom and mystery. Notably, it had a spacious attic, filled with the old belongings of previous owners. As someone with a passion for exploring vintage items and history, I often spent time there. It was in that very place, on one fateful evening, that I had the most terrifying experience of my life. One chilly late autumn evening, the cool air began to seep through the window panes. I decided to dedicate some time to cleaning out the attic, a task that had been long overdue. Thick dust hung in the air as I stepped inside, the musty smell of old wood and decaying paper assaulting my nostrils. The dim electric light from a swaying ceiling bulb barely illuminated the towering piles of clutter. Amidst a jumble of old trunks, yellowed newspapers, and damaged furniture, I discovered an antique wooden radio, looking old but surprisingly intact. Its dark wooden casing was worn at the edges, the large dial with its faded numbers, and the brass knobs were oxidized. Although I knew it was unlikely to work after all those years, I felt drawn to its beauty. I carefully wiped away the dust and brought it down to the living room, placing it on the oak coffee table, treating it as a unique decorative piece. A few days later, I was engrossed in reading a classic novel, enveloped by the familiar quiet of the house. Outside, the sky began to turn a grim gray. Suddenly, there was a loud bang. The house shook slightly and the lights flickered off. A sudden, fierce storm had arrived, bringing strong winds and torrential rain, causing a complete power outage throughout the area. I rummaged through a drawer, found my phone's flashlight, and turned it on, its weak yellow beam dancing across the old floral wallpaper, casting terrifying, dancing shadows. In the dreadful silence of the stormy night, an unexpected sound startled me so much that I dropped my book. The old radio on the table suddenly began to crackle with heavy static. My heart pounded in my chest. I stared at the radio. No way. It had been dead for so long. The crackling grew louder and louder, overpowering the sound of the wind and rain outside, then gradually transformed into a hoarse, distorted voice, as if coming from very far away, so heavily static-filled that it was barely discernible. "Help! Help me!" The voice was broken, full of weakness and despair. It sounded like someone trapped, trying to gasp out their last words. A chill ran down my spine. I nervously approached the radio, my hand trembling as I touched it. I tried to adjust the dials, futile as I knew it was, hoping to clarify the voice. The voice spoke again, a little clearer, though still distorted and filled with dread. In here, trapped, under, the floor. No, air. Then the voice was abruptly cut off by a prolonged, piercing shriek that suddenly ceased as if the source had been abruptly silenced. The radio returned to its vague static, then fell completely silent, like an inanimate object. My whole body went cold, sweat trickling down my forehead. It was a human voice, definitely a human voice, and that shriek, it haunted me to the bone. Who was it? What happened? I couldn't ignore this. I recalled what Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, my kind elderly neighbors, had told me when I first moved in. They said this house once belonged to a family who mysteriously disappeared in the 1950s. That story had been the talk of the town for years, but eventually faded into oblivion. Now those details only intensified my obsession. A dreadful suspicion began to form in my mind. For several nights afterward, I couldn't sleep peacefully. The weak voice and the terrifying shriek kept replaying in my mind, echoing relentlessly whenever I closed my eyes. I decided I had to find the truth. I believed someone or something was trying to communicate with me through this old radio. I gathered my flashlight and a set of tools and began my exploration in the house's basement. The basement was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of earth, old mold, and another indescribable odor, like the ancient scent of time and hidden things. My flashlight's weak beam only illuminated a few square feet around me, creating eerie, dancing shadow figures on the cold stone walls. I carefully stepped on the damp ground, trying to listen for any sound other than my own pounding heart. I began knocking on each stone wall, listening to the echoes. Most walls were solid, but in a hidden corner, behind a stack of rotten firewood piled almost to the ceiling, I discovered a section of wall that looked odd. The bricks there didn't quite match the rest of the wall, and there was a small gap at the top. When I tapped it, the sound was distinctly different, hollow, as if there was an empty space behind. My heart raced wildly in my chest. This was it. I felt an inexplicable chill run down my spine, but my curiosity was greater than my fear. I carefully cleared away the firewood and used a crowbar to pry out the bricks one by one. The musty smell and stagnant, heavy air rushed into my nostrils as an opening gradually appeared. I shone my flashlight inside, and what I saw made me shiver to the very core. It was a small, narrow, secret space, just large enough for a person to be curled up, seemingly sealed off for a very long time. And in the middle, I saw a human skeleton curled in a fetal position, grasping its knees, rotten clothes clinging to the bones, almost becoming one with the earth. Right beside it, there was a worn leather wallet covered in mildew and a discolored wedding ring, almost blending into the ground. I quickly backed away, almost collapsing. It was a person. Someone had been trapped here and died a horrible death, in isolation and despair. The wallet and the ring were undeniable evidence. My extreme fear transformed into icy dread. I immediately called the police with my phone, my voice trembling as I recounted my horrifying discovery. The police quickly arrived, shattering the quiet of the neighborhood. They cordoned off the area, and forensic investigators began their work. After examination, they confirmed it was the remains of Eleanor Vance, a young woman who disappeared in 1957. Around the same time, the former owners of the house mysteriously vanished. She had been a housekeeper for that family. Detectives believed she might have been deliberately or accidentally trapped in this secret room when the family left in a hurry, perhaps due to a conflict or some secret. The story was published in local newspapers, reviving the memory of an unsolved case. I spent many sleepless nights afterward. The weak voice and the shriek from the radio still haunted me, now with a more horrifying significance than ever. No one could explain why the radio had emitted that signal or voice, especially since it was long defunct and had no power source. Was it Eleanor's spirit trying to communicate with me from her secret grave? Or just a chillingly improbable coincidence, a cruel trick of fate? I don't know, but I am certain that some stories never truly die, and sometimes they find a way to make themselves heard from unexpected places, across space and time. The Victorian house is now not just where I live, but also a silent witness to a forgotten tragedy, a reminder that the past can lurk right beneath our feet. My name is Chloe Dubois, a 26-year-old graphic designer from France, who had just moved into a third-floor apartment in an old tenement building on the Lower East Side of New York. I loved the historic atmosphere and the vibrant hustle and bustle of this neighborhood, where every street corner seemed to hold its own story. My apartment, though small, offered a unique vantage point, overlooking a narrow alley and an old brick wall, directly facing another aged apartment building across the way. The only peculiar thing about my apartment was a small window in the bedroom, completely boarded up with a wooden plank from the outside. The landlord, a friendly but slightly eccentric Italian gentleman, explained that it was due to a noisy construction project in the alley some time ago, so they had sealed it for soundproofing and hadn't gotten around to removing it yet. I didn't mind much, as I appreciated the privacy and thought I could decorate that wall space with my paintings. One night, I was sitting and drawing in the living room, the vibrant neon lights from the street outside casting an ethereal glow into the room, blending reality with artistic dreams. Distant streetlights cast dancing shadows on the opposite brick wall. Around midnight, as I was finishing a sketch, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the bedroom, right where the boarded-up window was. It wasn't the sound of a mouse, but a dry, sharp scraping, as if someone was trying to pry at the wooden plank from the outside with something sharp. I stopped drawing, my eyes fixed on the bedroom wall, listening intently. The scratching resumed, clearer this time, seeming to be done with deliberate intent. My heart began to pound in my chest. My first thought was a homeless person seeking shelter. Or worse, a burglar attempting a break-in. I tiptoed towards the bedroom, trying not to make a sound. Each step felt heavier than the last. As I neared the window, I held my breath, straining to listen. The scratching stopped. An eerie silence filled the room, broken only by the frantic thumping of my own heart in my ears. Then something that froze me to the core, a soft, almost imperceptible human breath, seemed to emanate from directly behind the wooden plank. It wasn't a ragged or tired breath, but the breath of someone sneaking, lurking, as if trying to hold their breath to avoid detection. The distance felt like mere centimeters through the plank and window frame. I backed away, a chilling sensation running down my spine, as if an unseen hand had touched my skin. No one could possibly be there. That window was on the 3rd floor, and below it was a narrow alley, with no easy access or balcony. How could anyone be there? I tried to find a logical explanation, but nothing fit. I switched on my phone's flashlight and shone it directly onto the wooden plank. There were no large gaps. It was meticulously sealed, almost perfectly. I tried to calm myself, telling myself I was imagining things. Perhaps it was just strong winds rattling the old window frames or sounds from the building across the way. But then, something inexplicable happened. Through a tiny crack, just wide enough for an eye, between the plank and the window frame, an eye appeared. It was a green eye, unnaturally bright in the darkness, staring directly at me. It didn't blink, didn't move, just simply stared. A cold, emotionless gaze, yet filled with lurking and haunting intensity. My entire body went numb with fear. It was a human eye. Someone was staring at me through that tiny crack. I felt completely exposed, every bit of my privacy violated. That gaze was like an icy blade, piercing straight into my mind. I let out a piercing scream and backed away, tripping over the nightstand, sending a few books clattering to the floor. The loud noise seemed to startle the lurker. The green eye vanished instantly. I quickly turned on all the lights in the room, then rushed to the window and tried to look outside past the plank. Nothing. Only the brick wall of the opposite building and the empty, dark alley below. I didn't dare sleep in that room that night. I dragged my mattress to the living room, curled up under my blankets, trying to find some sleep. But my mind raced with the haunting image of that eye. The next morning, I immediately called my landlord, recounting the story in a panicked voice. He seemed quite bewildered and said nothing like that had ever happened before. He promised to send a handyman to remove the wooden plank immediately. When the handyman arrived, he removed the plank with ease. There was nothing unusual behind it, just a normal glass window, with no signs of forced entry or any large gaps. I felt a partial sense of relief, but a hint of doubt still lingered. Had I really seen that eye, or was it just an illusion created by my fear? Weeks later, I was still haunted by that gaze. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I began researching the history of my building and the building across the alley. I discovered that many years ago, a mysterious crime had occurred in the opposite apartment building. A man named David Miller had been murdered in his own apartment, and the perpetrator was never caught. What chilled me was that my apartment directly faced the victim's apartment. One night, I was sitting in the living room, looking out the now unboarded window. The streetlights shone in, creating a familiar scene. Suddenly, I saw a faint, flickering light appear in the opposite apartment, David Miller's apartment. The light flickered erratically, then disappeared. And then, I felt a cold gust of wind sweep through the room, even though all the windows were closed, and there was no wind outside. For a split second, I felt a chilling sense of familiarity. It was the feeling of that green eye, as if it were right here, in my apartment, or just across the street, from that very vacant apartment, looking right through me. I quickly drew the curtains, turning on all the lights in the house. I didn't know who or what it was, but I was certain that something terrifying had happened in this area, an unresolved secret, and I had unknowingly become a part of it. Since that night, whenever I look across at the building, I still feel as if I'm being watched, a cold gaze from behind the blind window of the past, a gaze that never blinks. My name is Liam O'Connell, a 29-year-old freelance photographer from Ireland, who had recently left the busy life of Dublin to embark on an ambitious personal project, documenting the desolate beauty of ghost towns and abandoned places in the American Southwest. I was particularly captivated by the stories of old mining towns, places where silver and gold once flowed freely, but now exist only as spectral remnants of the past, where time seemed to have stood still. I often drove my old pickup truck for hundreds of miles across the arid deserts and through rugged mountain ranges, seeking out the relics of a bygone era. One scorching summer day, the sun beat down relentlessly, as if trying to incinerate everything. After hours of driving on unnamed, dusty roads, I stumbled upon a small ghost town in Nevada, tucked deep within a red rock canyon, completely isolated from the outside world. Rotten wooden houses, dilapidated mine shafts with their crooked derricks, and a dusty main street were all that remained. A profound sense of isolation enveloped me. Not a single soul, no sound but the wind whistling through empty window frames and the faint rustle of sand. I spent the entire afternoon taking pictures, capturing the haunting desolation of the place. Each photograph told a story of loss and abandonment. As the sun began to set, painting the desert sky with vibrant crimson hues, I prepared to leave. My pickup truck was already waiting on the main road. But then, as I passed a small, less-traveled trail, I noticed a small building tucked away behind large rock formations, appearing to be an old, dilapidated church with a rusty cross on its roof. Something urged me to go there. I decided to stop by for a few more final shots. The trail leading to the church was rough and gravelly. Its wooden door hung loosely from its hinges, revealing a dark and dusty interior. Inside the church, everything was in ruins. Broken wooden pews lay scattered, stained glass windows were shattered, and the walls were ravaged by time. The air was thick with the scent of old, damp wood and ancient dust. I was in the midst of photographing these remnants, trying to capture the melancholy of a forgotten place, when my satellite phone, the only device with reception in such remote areas, suddenly vibrated fiercely in my jacket pocket. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number, with no caller ID, just a random string of digits. I hesitated. I wasn't expecting any calls out here, especially from an unknown number. But then, my curiosity got the better of me. I answered, bringing the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I said softly, my voice echoing strangely in the empty space of the church, as if someone else were listening. A heavy static crackled on the other end, as if someone was speaking through a broken old walkie-talkie or a very weak transmission. Then a hoarse, distorted voice, garbled by static, came through. "You, where are you? You need to leave." The voice sounded urgent and desperate. I frowned. "I'm in Ghost Town, name." I tried to answer as clearly as possible, though I felt an inexplicable chill beginning to spread through my body. "You? Do you see us?" The voice grew more frantic, interspersed with ragged breaths and other strange sounds like hurried footsteps. They're coming right now? Hide. Who's coming? I asked, a sense of intense unease rising within me. I looked around the empty church, seeing no one. Suddenly the static intensified, overwhelming even the wind outside, and the voice turned into a panicked, ear-splitting scream, full of despair and pain. "Run! They'll find you! Help! Help!" The scream was abruptly cut short by a sharp, dry gunshot sound, like a chilling echo in the quiet space. Then the line went completely silent, only the faint static remaining for a moment before fading away. My hand trembled violently, causing me to drop the phone onto the dusty floor. That last sound, it was too real. The gunshot echoed like a ghostly reverberation in my ears. I stood motionless in the church, feeling as if I had just overheard a conversation from another time, a tragedy unfolding right before my very senses, spanning time and space. My entire body shook uncontrollably. I dashed out of the church, jumped into my pickup truck, and drove away as fast as I could, leaving the ghost town and its mysteries behind. Extreme fear enveloped me, preventing me from stopping until I reached the nearest town, hundreds of miles away as dawn was breaking. Afterward, I spent a significant amount of time researching that ghost town, trying to find information about any disappearances or murders that occurred there. I discovered that, in the early 20th century, the town had indeed been a notorious haunt for a vicious outlaw gang led by a brutal leader. There were many stories of bloody purges, unsolved murders leaving no traces, and secrets buried deep within the mine shafts. No case was ever fully resolved, and tales of haunted spirits seemed to perpetually linger there. Weeks later, I was still haunted by that call. The scream and the gunshot still reverberated in my mind. I tried calling the strange number many times, but it always reported no signal, as if the number had never existed. I even returned to the ghost town once more, during the day, but found nothing unusual or any trace of the tragedy I had witnessed. One night, as I was reviewing the photos I had taken of the church on my computer, I suddenly noticed a tiny detail in a picture of the dilapidated altar area. Behind an old altar, there was a small gap between two wooden floorboards, hidden by dust and mildew. It was too small to see clearly with the naked eye, but when I zoomed in on the photo, I faintly saw something stuck inside, appearing to be an old phone or some kind of damaged communication device. I shivered. Was that where the call came from? I don't know. But since then, whenever my satellite phone rings in remote areas, I feel an extreme dread and a strange obsession. It's as if there's an echo from the past, a warning from trapped souls, still trying to communicate with this world. And I have unknowingly become the only one who can hear them, a witness to a tragedy long buried by time. That desolate wasteland is now not just a place for my photographs, but a chilling portal to untold horrors.